But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Galatians 4:4, New King James Version. Well, what more evidence do we need? This verse clearly depicts Jesus as being born, and born of a woman, obviously Mary, and born under the law, which clearly means that He was on planet Earth, living a life as a Jew under the Mosaic law just like every other Jew at the time. This one verse single-handedly emasculates the Jesus myth theory once and for all. Ouch! And checkmate, atheists. Mythicists. Case closed. Now, I don't know about you, but with the track record the New Testament has concerning forgeries and insertions into the original documents, and mistranslations, and so on, I would think it would be a good idea for us to once again look under the hood and see if there's more here than meets the eye. But it may surprise you that I'm not even going to suggest interpolation here. I think I have a much better explanation to unveil. I think we can come up with an alternative meaning for this verse that makes sense of Paul's theology and doesn't violate the definitions of the underlying Greek words. But first, we still got to do a little digging. Let's save the last half of the verse, the contentious part, for later, and go ahead and examine the first half. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son. Now, the first phrase seems clear enough. When God was good and ready, and not until then. The Mosaic Law had been around for hundreds of years, but for some reason, God was finally ready to relieve the poor Jews from the heavy burden of the law and reveal Jesus to mankind during Paul's lifetime, sometime in the middle of the 1st century. Now, the confusion lies in the fact that this revealing is depicted as a physical birth and life in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and we are accustomed to this perspective. In the epistles of Paul, however, there is no such hint, and on the contrary, Paul tells us in many verses that this revealing of Jesus happened via secret prophetic verses from books such as Psalms, Isaiah, and Zechariah, etc. But we should be able to agree that the fullness of time means when God finally chose to reveal Jesus and not before. This fullness of time also coincides with Paul's understanding of the end of time. Time was up for Paul and mankind as Jesus' first and last appearance to mankind in physical form was just around the corner. Jesus' first appearance to mankind was from inside the very writings of Scripture, but for the second and final time, the parousia, He would appear physically, descending through the clouds, flanked by countless angels. Now let's look at the next phrase, God sent forth His Son. If we read this while wearing our gospel-tinted glasses, it certainly seems to say that God sent His Son from heaven to be born on earth, live a life, preach, and then die on the cross, etc. But is all of that really contained in those 5 words? Let's remove our gospel-tinted glasses just for a moment and see if we can tell what this actually says. All it says is that God sent forth His Son. There's no mention of planet Earth. There's no mention of a Jesus that was human and lived on planet Earth. There is no mention about the destination of this Jesus other than generally in the direction of mankind. What about a life, a crucifixion, any details from the Gospels? Nothing. Nothing at all except that God sent Jesus in the general direction of mankind in some form or fashion. Could it be that God sent forth His Son to mankind via revelation from Scripture? Could it be that Paul is simply reiterating that God revealed His Son to mankind from the very passages of the Old Testament, such as Psalms 22 and Isaiah 53 and Zechariah 9 and countless others? Is it possible that this sending forth wasn't a physical sending forth? I believe we can get some corroboration if we look at a few other verses that Paul wrote, starting with Galatians 4, 5 through 6. We'll start with verse 4 for continuity's sake. God sent forth His Son to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Is it possible that this sending forth mentioned in verse 6 is a similar sending forth mentioned in verse 4? The same exact verb, ex apostello, is used in both verses, and interestingly, this word is used most often in conjunction with God sending his Spirit, not sending a human from point A to point B. The idea being that Jesus didn't physically come to earth during Paul's day, but God sent Jesus to mankind in the form of information, revelation from Scripture, and those who believed it received the Spirit of Jesus. These sendings are not two events separated by decades. They do not describe a birth and life and death of Jesus as the first sending and another much later sending once people believed. These are two sendings that happened within a very short time frame shortly before Paul's letters. Jesus is sent or revealed to men via Scripture, and upon belief, Jesus is sent into their hearts, so to speak. There is no hint of a life or death in the phrase, God sent forth his Son. And it sounds very ambiguous if we believe Jesus actually lived a life on earth and taught the things that he allegedly taught and did miracles. But it sounds correct if Jesus was sent to mankind in the form of revelation. God sent mankind his Son by encoding the information in the passages of the Old Testament. A few verses to look at regarding that. Romans 16:25 and 26, where Paul directly says that Jesus was revealed in Scripture, and it is this revelation that is made known to all nations. Galatians 1:12, where Paul says he learned about Jesus via revelation. Galatians 3:8, where Paul claims that a knowledge of Jesus was already encoded inside the Old Testament Scriptures, and this was revealed even to Abraham. So we have Paul saying that when God was ready, he sent forth Jesus, which I claim is the very revealing Paul talks about in the verses I just showed. Now, let's have a look at the last half of verse 4.